She's not your soulmate. She's your symbol. You don't miss her. You miss the illusion she let you believe. The woman you can't stop thinking about. She was never just a person. She was a projection, a mirror for every part of you that felt unseen, unfinished, and starving. Carl Jung knew this obsession well. He called it the anima, the feminine soul inside every man, exiled and forgotten. And when a man loses connection with that part of himself, he begins to chase women who feel like home, but live like chaos. Not because he loves them, but because they echo his own absence. This isn't a story about heartbreak, it's a psychological confession, a descent into the truth most men will never face. You're not in love, you're in mourning for the version of yourself that only existed in her reflection, and that's why you can't let go, because she didn't just leave. She took your forgotten self with her. But what if I told you she wasn't the ending, she was the doorway, and the real woman you're chasing is inside you? He swears it was love, something eternal, something sacred. But the truth is more unsettling. He was staring into a mirror, not a woman, not seeing her, but the echo of a forgotten self, dressed in skin and memory. When a man is fractured, his anima, his inner feminine, doesn't disappear. She hides. And when she returns, she wears the face of the one who left. She smiled at him once, and in that smile, he didn't see her. He saw warmth he never gave himself, wholeness he didn't know he lost. She became the container for every suppressed softness, every orphaned dream. Not a lover, a symbol, a goddess forged in the fires of neglect. And so he worshipped her, but what he really worshipped was his own potential. Jung whispered what most men never dare admit. She is you. Not literally. Symbolically, psychologically. She awakened his heart not because she was divine, but because he'd gone numb. The anima doesn't knock politely. She invades through projection. And suddenly, her absence feels like death, because it's the death of who he could have been. Men don't mourn women. They mourn possibility. What she offered was never love. It was emotional resurrection. She animated the parts he thought were gone. The artist, the poet, the boy. And when she vanished, so did the version of him that only existed in her presence. That's why he keeps chasing ghosts. He's chasing himself. He told his friends he loved her, but what he meant was, I loved who I was around her. I felt alive. That's not love. That's dependency dressed in romantic poetry. And when she left, she didn't just walk away. She ripped the umbilical cord to his soul. Because that's what anima projections do. They give life, then take it back. There's a myth most men carry without knowing. She'll make me whole. But wholeness isn't gifted. It's remembered. And it doesn't live in her eyes. It lives in the silence he avoids, in the pain he anesthetizes. He didn't fall for her. He fell into the fantasy of reintegration. But fantasies by nature are unsustainable. She wasn't the answer. She was the trigger, the spark that exposed how lost he's been. Not in the world, but in himself. He wasn't obsessed with her body. He was obsessed with the meaning he poured into it. She became his religion, and like all false gods, she betrayed him. But she didn't do it maliciously. She did it to wake him. You're not in love, you're in mourning. Not for her, for the version of you that only breathed when she was near. That man you think she destroyed. He never existed without her. But the man who watches this, in silence, in ruin, he is real. And this is your invitation, not to chase her, but to reclaim him. He swears it was her beauty that broke him, but beauty doesn't wound like that. Starvation does. Not hunger for food or sex, but for presence, for depth, for mattering. She didn't hypnotize him. His emptiness did, and she just happened to be standing there when it echoed loudest. He didn't fall for her. He fell into a moment that finally felt like home. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, he felt seen, not judged, not used, not invisible, just seen. But it wasn't intimacy. It was emotional anesthesia, a hit of attention in a life full of withdrawal. Most men don't know the difference between connection and relief. So when a woman finally leans in, they collapse. They call it fate. But it's a trauma response. That's not a soulmate. She was never the one. She was just the first who didn't ignore the fracture. The wound didn't bleed for her. It bled through her. Jung once said, "The man who avoids his wounds becomes a slave to anyone who soothes them." And so he confused kindness with salvation. A few compliments felt like resurrection, and when she left, it felt like crucifixion. Not because she was cruel, but because he was never whole. She wasn't the cure, she was the cover, and obsession is just what happens when a man clings to anesthesia. He called it love, but it was relief with a pretty face. And the moment she stopped giving it, he called it betrayal. But he was never betrayed, just exposed. She didn't feed him. She filled a gap so wide it swallowed everything else. Friends, purpose, identity. And when the drug wore off, he felt worse than before. Because now he knew what presence felt like, and he couldn't unknow it. That's what makes obsession so cruel. It's not about her. It's about the loss of self. He keeps asking why he can't move on. But the real question is, what did she represent that you never gave yourself? Her silence isn't punishment. It's the sound of your inner world, finally unmasked. It hurts because it reveals how long you felt like nothing, not since she left, since before she arrived. This is the hangover of starvation. You taste a drop of water and call it the ocean. But what you needed wasn't her. It was nourishment, soul-level nourishment. And until you stop begging mirrors to feed you, you'll keep calling the absence of love, love itself. It didn't start with her. It started with him, collapsing silently. One rejection, one unanswered message, one shift in tone. And suddenly, she wasn't just a woman, she was the world. Every breath became a countdown until she returned. Because the less he mattered to her, the more she mattered to him. This is the inversion few admit. You don't chase someone because they're divine. You chase because you've forgotten your own name. She didn't grow in power, you shrank in presence, and the imbalance wasn't romantic, it was existential. Jung warned that when the ego is weak, projection becomes a religion. She became a goddess, not because she earned it, but because he abdicated, his throne, his code, his direction. And in that vacuum, she became the altar he prayed to, not out of faith, out of desperation. Every time she ignored him, he imagined more meaning. Every absence became sacred, every silence a message, but it wasn't mysticism. It was low self-worth creating myths. She didn't change. He distorted. Because the psyche cannot tolerate emptiness, so it invents worship. He told himself she was rare. But rarity isn't in her, it's in the forgotten value he no longer saw in himself. You don't see clearly when you're starving. You hallucinate. And she became the hallucination of everything he wished he was. Calm, confident, whole. But this is the truth that breaks men open. Her absence didn't break you, your forgotten self did. You abandoned the one person who could have saved you, the man inside, waiting to be remembered. The one buried beneath compliance, silence, performance. He worshipped her, but only because he was too afraid to look in the mirror. Afraid he'd see nothing. Afraid the reflection would be just a puppet, smiling, dying. So he clung to her to avoid the void. But projection is a fragile god. And when it breaks, it shatters what's left of you too. She didn't ruin you. You abandoned your throne and called it love. You forgot your function, your fire, your form. And she became the placeholder for everything you lost. Not because she asked for it, but because you gave it. He thought it was longing, but it was avoidance. A man running, not toward her, but away from himself. Every message he sent, every memory he replayed, wasn't love. It was a lifeboat from a sinking mind. Because the silence inside was louder than her absence, he told himself, if I could just get her back. But what he really meant was, I can't bear this stillness. this vacuum, this void. Not because silence is cruel, but because it reveals what you've ignored. Jung called it the shadow, the forgotten parts of you whispering in the dark. And when she left, those whispers became screams. You didn't want her. You wanted escape. Escape from the empty apartment, the unlit mornings, the digital scroll that numbs but never heals. She was the distraction, the drug, the detour. You thought it was romance, but it was ritual. A routine to avoid the terrifying stillness of becoming yourself. Every man has a moment he avoids, that 3 a.m. stare at the ceiling when no one is texting back, and the silence says, "Now what?" Not from her, from within. But most don't listen. They scroll, they call, they chase. Jung once said, "The outer woman is often a symbol of the man's own soul, or its lack." And you weren't obsessed with her. You were avoiding the silence that introduced you to yourself. You mistook distraction for destiny. She didn't fill your heart. She just muted the noise inside it, temporarily. You told yourself she was the one. But what if she was just the shield, the emotional hangover you clung to so you'd never have to detox your soul? And every time you reached out, it wasn't to reconnect, it was to delay awakening. You don't miss her. You miss who you pretended to be when she was around, whole, wanted, alive. She gave you a mask, and now it's gone. But silence isn't punishment, it's initiation. It's your chance to meet the man beneath the noise. And that man, he's not who she remembers. He's the one who remembers himself, not in her mirror, but in his own. And that's the point where longing stops and listening begins. He thinks he's in love, but love doesn't rot like this. Love breathes. This suffocates. What he calls passion is grief in costume, a sorrow so old it forgot its name, and so it wrapped itself around her image and called it longing. There's a weight behind his ribs, dull, slow, relentless, not romantic, ancient, not because of her absence, but because no one ever taught him how to mourn. Men aren't allowed to break, so they obsess, because fixation feels stronger than collapse. Jung once said, "Unfelt emotion becomes unconscious behavior," and this is the trap. When you bury pain, it doesn't disappear. It just finds a new face, a woman, a memory, a wound with lipstick. You think you're fighting for her, but you're really fighting against what you never grieved. She wasn't your addiction. Avoidance was. Avoidance of the funeral you never held, for the boy who wasn't protected, for the man who was never chosen. So instead of weeping, you worshipped. Because obsession gives purpose to pain. Every time you check her social media, it's not curiosity, it's relapse. Not into desire, but into anesthesia. You can't cry. So you scroll, you fantasize, you ache, but none of it moves the grief. It just freezes it in new shapes, and you call that shape her. You told yourself you were fighting for love, but grief doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be felt. Instead, you rehearsed arguments in your head. You crafted unsent letters. You begged silence for closure. But grief isn't cured by logic, only by acknowledgement. This isn't about her anymore. It's about everything you swallowed because there was no one to hold it. And now, the ghost of that weight lives in your chest and wears her perfume. You think if she just came back, it would all make sense again. But sense was never the point. Expression was. Grief unspoken becomes obsession repeated. You don't need her to heal. You need a grave for everything you buried inside her, not a grave for her body, a grave for the illusion that if you loved hard enough, none of this would have hurt. But it did, and it will, until you let the tears do what your silence never could. This isn't about her smile, it's about the echo of another face, one older, one buried. You weren't chasing love, you were chasing permission, not to be held, but to be seen, to be enough. And that need didn't start with her. It started in your childhood kitchen. A boy grows up watching his mother's mood like a map. He learns to adjust, to perform, to please, not because he's weak, but because it was survival. And when he becomes a man, he doesn't stop. He just chooses women who make him feel the same hunger. Jung called it the maternal complex, a pattern where men romanticize the feminine not out of love, but out of conditioning. She doesn't represent freedom, she represents familiarity. Her approval feels like oxygen, her disapproval like suffocation, because deep down, he's not loving her, he's replaying his past. You didn't love her devotion, you needed her validation. Every compliment was a stamp of worth, every withdrawal, a return to emotional starvation. And so you worked for her love, like a boy working for gold stars. Not because she demanded it, but because you never unlearned the pattern. She became the woman your mother never was, or the one she was too much of. Nurturing, then cold, present, then punishing. And you chased that contradiction because it felt like home, not a safe home. A familiar prison. When she left, you didn't just lose a lover. You lost the fantasy of finally being chosen, not by her, but by a deeper archetype, the one who made you believe you had to earn love. That's why the pain is so sharp, so confusing. It's not heartbreak, it's inherited grief. She didn't reject you, she freed you from a role you were never meant to keep playing, from a pattern that was never about you. And though it feels like abandonment, it's actually initiation, the first crack in the mask you wore to feel lovable. You weren't obsessed with her. You were trapped in a cycle older than memory, the one where your value depended on her gaze. But love isn't validation, and healing isn't getting her back. It's facing the part of you that still believes you must earn affection to exist. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. He says it's fate, a connection too deep to explain. But what he's really saying is, she reminded me of something I never healed. Not because she was special, but because the wound she touched was. It wasn't her voice that hooked him. It was the echo inside it, the echo of an old injury that never got a name. There's a comfort in the chaos, a strange calm in the emotional volatility. She pulled away. He chased. She criticized. He conformed. It felt like love because it felt like home. Not the kind of home with warmth and rest, the kind with tension in the walls and silence after storms. Jung warned, what remains unconscious will be lived as fate. So he keeps falling for the same woman in different bodies, not because he's cursed, but because he's programmed, and until he questions the code, he'll keep mistaking pain for chemistry, because pain is the only language his nervous system trusts. She didn't entrance him. His trauma did. The feeling of being not quite enough, but still trying. The thrill of winning her attention, only to lose it again, like a dog returning to an empty bowl, hoping this time there's food. That isn't passion, that's conditioning. He says she was magnetic, but magnets only work if the charge matches, and his charge was unresolved longing, the kind that keeps picking at old scabs just to feel something. He didn't choose her. His wounds did. She reminded him of the first time he felt small, of the first time love meant proving. She became the test he never passed, and he kept hoping if he aced it this time, the pain would end. But she wasn't the test. She was the repetition of the question. You don't miss her. You miss the familiarity of trying to matter, of building a castle out of apologies and calling it commitment. But castles built on old wounds don't stand. They bleed. And that blood isn't love. It's memory. The soul repeats until the ego breaks the loop. So the real question isn't why you still want her. It's why you keep needing that kind of woman to feel alive. She wasn't your future. She was your feedback. A mirror, not a mate. A reminder, not a reason to stay. He kept asking, why won't she choose me? But the better question was, why haven't I chosen myself yet? He confused control with connection, possession with partnership, because deep down, he believed if he could just win her, he'd finally be enough. She became the prize, not because she was rare, but because his worth was missing. And when a man lacks inner sovereignty, outer validation becomes his religion. Every reply, a rosary bead, every silence, a crucifixion. It wasn't her he was trying to hold, it was meaning he refused to give himself. Jung said control over another is always a substitute for sovereignty within. He didn't want her freedom, he wanted to be needed, to be central, to be irreplaceable. Because if she needed him, maybe he mattered. If she stayed, maybe he was real. But the truth is, she never escaped. You never stood firm enough to be chosen freely. You built a cage out of anxiety and called it loyalty. You wrapped her in guilt and called it love. But what you feared wasn't her leaving. It was your emptiness. You wanted to be chosen, but refused to choose yourself first. So you gave her everything, time, energy, identity, and resented her when it wasn't enough. That's not love. That's emotional blackmail with good intentions. You weren't building a bond. You were filling a void. And when she pulled away, that void howled. Not because she was cruel, but because your entire self-image depended on her reflection. When she withdrew, your mirror shattered, and all you saw was the man you forgot to become. She wasn't your enemy. She was your alarm, the one who revealed just how long you've abandoned yourself, your dreams, your fire, your mission. You made her the sun and dimmed your own light just to orbit her. But no woman can respect a man who treats himself like a shadow. The one who obsesses over being enough is usually the one who walked away from himself first. You didn't need her to complete you. You needed to return to the man who stopped waiting to be chosen and started becoming someone who no longer needs to chase. You've spent months, maybe years, trying to get her back. But what if it was never about her? What if every message, every dream, every relapse was your soul whispering, "Come home"? You thought she was your purpose, but your obsession was a symptom, not a sign. And the pain you feel, it's not love. It's the price of abandoning yourself for a fantasy. So now ask yourself, what are you really chasing? A woman or a feeling, her presence or your forgotten power? What if everything you were looking for in her was just what you abandoned in yourself? This journey doesn't end with forgetting her. It begins with remembering you. If this truth cuts deep, let it. It means something inside you is waking up. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue this brutal, beautiful journey into self-knowledge, emotional sovereignty, and liberation. If she felt like a goddess, it's because you forgot you were a man. But in the next video, we go deeper into why her presence doesn't just attract you, it regresses you. Carl Jung called it a possession. You'll call it the truth you've been avoiding.